Hey everybody, welcome to Chapter 4, Supervising a Diverse Workforce. So this chapter will cover sort of the laws surrounding managing diversity in the workplace, and we'll talk a little bit about some of the advantages to having a more diverse workforce. I know in my own business, when I'm kind of the only decision maker and I'm the only employee, which means I don't have a diverse group of people, I just have me, or I can maybe turn to my spouse or my mother, who ran a business successfully for years. I'm missing out because I only have one perspective. And turning to my wife and my mother, they have very similar perspectives because our life experience has been, very much the same. And so, whereas here at work, where I have people from different backgrounds, different faith or religious traditions, different genders, different racial or ethnic origins, suddenly I get a whole array of minds working on a problem we have at work, and it comes up with all sorts of ideas I wouldn't have come up with on my own. And so this is a cool chapter in the sense that not only do we learn about the legal side, but also we can really understand some of the real value of having a diverse workplace. So you hear this a lot from managers, and it's a myth. It's not true. But I think it's because managers are pretty reluctant to discipline or discharge protected group employees. And so, I kind of skipped past it. But so here's the classes of protected group employees. So these are people who are protected by law. Okay, it's against the law to discriminate on the basis of any of these protected classes. You'll notice that sexual orientation is not on the list. Many states have specific laws that also prohibit discrimination on that basis, but it is still not written into the federal Civil Rights Act. Okay, so we have to recognize that regardless of whether or not an employee is in a protected group, we still need them to do their job. And so it is completely allowable to discipline an employee, even if they're in a protected group, if they're not following company policies, and to fire people who are in a protected group as long as there's a cause or a reason. The law prohibits discrimination, not treating an employee like an employee. So that's an important differentiation. All right, so this is a little bit old. These are from 2013, the Roundtree Foundation interviews. And so these are barriers that many minorities often find when trying to get hired and also within the workplace. Just the data is there, right? That many minority groups have lower education levels on average, that they feel excluded from informal networks. And so like after work, all the guys go out for beer and female employees feel like they're not invited or whatever, right? And so these barriers are things that we need to be cognizant of, especially when we're in supervision or in management positions. And they don't all apply to all groups. In fact, to try to apply them completely to any group would be one of these, right? The one second to the bottom, prejudice and stereotyping. It's not fair to assume that because somebody is a specific race that they're going to have language difficulties or that they're going to have low self-confidence. So we have to be careful and not ever say, oh, well, all of this group of minority, they struggle with this. That's not true. There are people with low self-confidence of every group, and there are people with lower education levels in every group. What we should recognize as managers is that some of our employees may be struggling with some of these barriers, and what we want to do is remove barriers. We want to let people who deserve to be promoted, regardless of what their race or gender or religion or anything else is. So that's, to me, that's the bottom line. Sometimes I feel like textbooks and things like that, they're pushing certain ideas of what it is to be to discriminate and what it isn't. And honestly, any situation where someone does not have an equal chance to compete on their merits is discrimination, right? And so that's what we're trying to avoid. So again, I won't read these to you, but things we want to do is we want to make sure we understand the effects of discrimination and try to be fair and considerate to people. We want to appreciate cultural differences. And I'd say go beyond cultural differences and appreciating them and like recognize the value that they have. Again, so often we become mired in thinking about things the way we think about things, and it's really valuable to have somebody who thinks differently because of different experiences in their life. And then where language is an issue, we need to work to help people with that. This isn't a workplace thing, but I teach accounting for BYU Idaho, and we have a bunch of students in there every year for whom English is not their first language, and so trying to provide, in our case, like tutors who speak Spanish or French or whatever the language is, can really just be a one way where we're recognizing that some people are going to face challenges that are people who are just as intelligent and capable. And of course, we have to find a balance, right? We can't provide, if I've got 20 people who speak Spanish, it may be worth it to have a Spanish speaking teacher teach that class. If I've got one, we've got to try to find other ways to accommodate that are cost effective and reasonable. So I'm not sure, if we're being honest, I'm not sure why we're I think we should talk about the importance of recognizing the needs of all employees, and recognize that in some areas, women as workers are still being underemployed or underpromoted. That's important, and that's still a current issue. But this kind of like entry of women into many career fields, we have women have been working for a long time. Again, what we need to do is make sure it's fair in those areas where there's bias or discrimination. We need to fix that, but it's not like a new thing that suddenly now there's women in the workforce, right? They've been all over. Although there are areas, this is discussed here, that are traditionally male. This said male donated jobs, but I think they mean dominated jobs. And accounting and management is still places where you see more men than women. And so as supervisors, as the managers, we need to watch that, right? And say, okay, do I have bias? Again, if people have equal opportunity to apply for and you really are judging the merits of people fairly, then you're doing a good job. But if we have a situation where it's impossible for a woman to get promoted, even if she's the best one for the job, then we're having issues. And so that's important. Sexual harassment is against the law. We'll actually talk about it a lot more when you take a business law class. But and this doesn't just apply to women, but it is predominantly an issue for women. And what I mean by that is, yes, some men do get sexually harassed in the workplace, but something like 90+% of reported workplace sexual harassment is men harassing women. So we need to be cognizant of that as managers, that we're not creating an environment that is hostile to work in, whether from men or women, and recognize that women in a hugely disproportionate amount are the victims of sexual harassment. Again, women need to have the same equal access to training and development as any other employee, and then recognize that pregnancy specifically, and family care, but especially pregnancy, really is something that only happens to, I know this isn't science class, but our female workers are the ones who are getting pregnant. And so we have to understand that it's going to, again, disproportionately impact this group of people. And so we have to follow the law. The Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978 means you can't like fire people because they're pregnant, or you can't be treated differently in any way, right? And then the Family Medical Leave Act requires that eligible employees must be granted up to 12 work weeks of unpaid leave. So even like, and this one applies to men and women. So if a dad wants to take time off, unpaid time off under FMLA, the company has to let them and can't punish them for doing that. So that's what's important about these laws, is not only can people take the time off, but they can't be punished or be demoted because of it. So that's important to recognize. And then the Equal Pay Act of 1963 requires that men and women performing equal work must receive equal pay. There's some pretty interesting case law out there about what constitutes equal work. And so that's some interesting stuff if you're ever interested in it. If you're into soccer, the United States Soccer Federation has been fighting this issue for a while, and it's been interesting to see. Now they've signed a collective bargaining agreement where men's soccer players and women's soccer players have all signed the same agreement, and so hopefully that will help with all of that discussion, and all of the parties involved will find that it's fair. Okay. Employees with disabilities, same thing. Federal law, and here's the federal laws up here on the screen, protects workers with disabilities, and it only applies to larger businesses, the American with Disabilities Act, so companies with 15 or more employees. So under the ADA, somebody has to be a qualified disabled individual, which means they meet the criteria in the law. And then business owners or managers are required to give what's called a reasonable accommodation. Again, interesting case law about what constitutes reasonable, right? And so it says without creating an undue hardship for the employer, but I know employers at times have had to really invest large amounts of money to accommodate a disabled person, whether that be putting, ramps so that people can get their wheelchairs into places, or just any other sort of accommodation you can think of. That's the requirement. And so a lot of times this will happen where the disabled employee will just reach out to the employer and say, I need this help. And the employer just does it, and that's great. But other times the employer may have, say we can't afford to do that, and then they'll have to have sort of a negotiation about what they can do to meet that person's need. And occasionally it goes to court because people can't agree. Recognize that older employees, again, are required to not discriminate against older workers under the Age Discrimination and Employment Act, the ADEA, and that did away with things like mandatory retirement ages, except for in businesses that can prove there's a bona fide reason that they need to do that. Anyway, so there's that law. Religious beliefs, this is under the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Again, you can't discriminate against people based on their religion, and you must make reasonable accommodations for employees with differing religious beliefs. All right. And then a recognition that kind of the world we're living in is growing smaller as technology grows more powerful, and so it's very normal that you'll work with people from all over the world. And we need to recognize still that everybody deserves to be treated with respect and have the same opportunities to grow in a company, and also that we should be cognizant of cultural differences, and then we can actually grow from them, right? We can actually learn and better understand our work environment and maybe the needs of our customers and the needs of the growing company. All right, so I kind of mentioned this already, but there's kind of an overriding consideration that we're dealing with here, which is be diligent in being fair. If somebody complains, take care of them, treat them as a priority, don't blow people off when they complain. Listen to people and report to higher level management or human resources. That we should work to gain cultural competency. If we're working with people who have cultural backgrounds we don't understand, we need to put some effort into trying to understand them. It's not really a fair defense, either legally or morally, to say, well, I just don't understand, people from that background. That's not enough. So we need to put in effort and try to understand everyone. And then finally, inclusion. the idea that everybody deserves an opportunity to fully participate. And it doesn't say it on here, but I think to fully have a chance, the same chances for promotion, the same chances for growth in a company. That's the overriding rules, right? Like if you do that, you're fair, you try to gain cultural competency, and you're inclusive, you're probably going to be all right from a legal standpoint and a moral standpoint. Anyway, so that's kind of a lot of information for this chapter, but these three things boil it all down to I think what really matters from a legal and moralistic sense. I hope it was interesting and valuable to you, and I hope you have a great week, and good luck.